Welcome aboard Dragonfire and another adventure in sailing solo at 70 with me, David Fansler, as I head to Baltimore on this adventure.
This is the story of a boy who in his teens started selling sunfish. In his 30s, he sailed with a friend on his Catalina 27. In his 40s, he bought a Hobie 16, which he sailed every year at the beach for a week. Also in his 40s, he bought a Catalina 27, followed by a Morgan Out Island 41. He sailed the Morgan Out Island for more than 16,000 miles until his 60s when he sold it. He then bought a Hobie 21 SE, which kept him happy for a while, but then he bought a Beneteau 50.4, which he started sailing. And he's sailing it by himself, so sailing solo at 70 is me, David Fansler. Only now I'm 71.
Oops, make that 73. It's early-ish July, and I left yesterday from Washington, North Carolina. Had to plow my way through the mud at the marina I was staying at. I'm headed to Baltimore, actually north of Baltimore, for two reasons. One, to take the boat to my co-owner so he can enjoy it a while. And number two, to go to his daughter's wedding, Anne Marie. She and Mike are getting married late-ish July, and I'm sailing the boat up. Mary is going to bring the dogs up later on in time for the wedding, and it should be a good visit. We're looking forward to it. As I said, I left last night from yesterday afternoon. It was actually about 6 or 7 o'clock, and ran into some problems almost immediately. The autopilot rudder reference was not working, and so I dropped anchor and looked for a cause for it. Couldn't find anything, so I picked anchor up and decided to head to Oriental. That would be the best place to go find a new rudder reference. While underway, I did some reading on it and found out that it's a very simple device. It's just a potentiometer on an arm, and it moves with the rudder as it moves. So I did some looking around at the wiring for the coming from the rudder reference and found a bad place in it. So I took the rudder reference off and replaced the wire. Rudder reference is wonderfully working again, which is a good thing because I could not imagine having to steer this boat for the next few days and doing nothing else. I love an autopilot. It's one of the greatest things for single-handed sailing that you can imagine. So with that out of the way, I continued on down the Pamlico River out into the Pamlico Sound, headed east toward Ocracoke, and made a left-hand turn late in the night and sailed up the Pamlico Sound. And now I'm in the end of the Pamlico Sound and the beginning of the Roanoke Sound. At the end of the Pamlico Sound is a channel called Old House Channel, and it takes you down and it takes you toward the coast, the Outer Banks, and then it splits and it goes north toward Roanoke Island and Manteo, and it goes right or south to the new Mark Bass Night Bridge and out into the ocean. So I will be taking the right-hand turn, obviously, so I can get out into the ocean. A lot of people are, well, with good reason, they're intimidated by Oregon Inlet, which is what goes under the Mark Bass Night Bridge. It is a little bit of a tricky piece of maneuvering. On the ocean side, the buoys are often moved because of shoaling that takes place there quite frequently. But I just got a notice the other day where the Coast Guard is trying an experiment, and the buoys now have AIS. So you can actually follow the buoys live on your chart plotter if you have AIS. And it seems to be a good idea to be able to maneuver through this channel. We shall see as we get there. High tide was about 11:30 this morning. It's 1 o'clock or something like that. And I am sailing slowly up toward Old House Channel. It probably takes a half hour, 45 minutes to go down the Old House Channel. And low tide is at 4:30. And so I should be there in plenty of time for low tide. I think it's important for me to state why I have to use Oregon Inlet with all of its intimidation. And that is that the height of the mast on this boat off the water is 68.5 feet. Now, ICW bridges are only 65 feet. So that presents a little bit of a problem. I can't go down the ICW without running into the bridges. So Oregon Inlet is the only way I can get in and out of the ocean to the Pamlico Sound. Important places in the Pamlico Sound would be Washington, North Carolina, and Oriental, North Carolina. I can't get to New Bern because you have to go under a bridge. From Oriental, there is a channel that runs straight to Morehead City and Beaufort, North Carolina, which is a deep water port, but there's a bridge on that stretch of water that I can't get under. So I'm very limited with where I can go in and out. The sailing has been very smooth. Last night I got some good wind, made good time. Today the wind died in the morning, and so I was motoring at about 1200 RPMs. And finally the wind has picked up, and I put up the Genoa, and eventually it built enough that I could turn off the motor and still make roughly 6 knots is what I'm doing right now on the Genoa alone. Once I get to Old House Channel, I'll pull the Genoa in and run under motor to go through Old House Channel. I don't like to risk going through pieces of water that can be tricky under sail. I would rather play it safe and go under motor. Sleeping in the cockpit last night was pretty good. Always on the first night of a trip, I am excited and don't sleep a whole lot. So I've slept a lot today during the morning. Feel fairly refreshed at this point. Tonight we'll be out on the wide blue ocean, and should be good sleeping then as well. The winds are predicted to blow more or less to the north for the next few days, so it should be good sailing all the way around. 2 weeks ago, I took a trip to Ocracoke, North Carolina. Mary and the dogs were on board with me, and it was the first time since Jeff and I have owned the boat that I've actually had somebody with me going to a destination. So that was exciting. It was a regatta for raising money for the Little Washington Sailing School, a very good cause to teach young children how to sail and how to enjoy it. Being a regatta, you started at different times. The slowest boats started first. The fastest boats started last. We were ranked as the second fastest boat in the group, and therefore we were next to the last to start the regatta. It was an exciting time. I told a few people that I wasn't really taking the regatta serious, but if I turned up in Ocracoke without my wife, it was simply because I understand that a lighter boat sails faster. Mary stayed on board the entire time. I did not ditch her. We passed quite a few boats. The boat that was ranked as the fastest never caught up with us. We spent a good amount of time running 8.5 knots and 8 knots and 7 knots. We passed a large number of boats, and the ending got a little hairy because the winds had picked up to a sustained 30 knots, gusting to 50, and the chop was running 4 and 5 feet, and it was not especially comfortable for some people. We had a hard time tacking a couple of times, so we lost positions with that. But as I said, the primary purpose of the regatta was simply to raise money for the sailing school in Washington. Mark Henley of Mikado's Marina organizes this every year. This was the 62nd running, I think, of the regatta. Well, it's about midnight on Tuesday night, and the wind has picked up. Let me back up. At 4:30 at low tide, I passed under the Martin Bass Knight Bridge into Oregon Inlet, which is the channel that I have to take out into the ocean because of the height of the mast. After that, I moved roughly 11 miles offshore to a line I had previously established as a route that tends to avoid anything close to shore. Oops, sorry about that. And so I have been traveling since then, and it's midnight now, so that's roughly, probably 7 hours since I left Oregon Inlet, and I have just about made it to the border of Virginia and North Carolina. I am roughly, 20 miles away. I'm already lining up for the entrance into the Chesapeake Bay. Not sure what I'm going to do yet, whether I'm going to stop and sleep somewhere on anchor, or you keep going and catnapping. It's a busy place, and so catnapping may not be the best idea, but we'll see once we get up there. When I had the boat out for the haul out to paint the bottom, I installed some blue LEDs on the bottom of the stern. They're in the water, on the bottom of the boat actually, but at the stern of the boat. And they are quite fascinating to watch in clear water. Now, in the Pamlico Sound, it's as brown as coffee and you can't see squat. I got to see some of what they did when we were in Ocracoke, because that was fairly clear water. But here, sailing along at 7 knots with just the Genoa, they are fascinating to watch. I took a video of it, and so we'll watch part of that at this point. The video doesn't do the lights justice. It's really one of those things that you need to see in person. I've got all the sides up on the cockpit, or the 2 sides, and I've got half the back up when before the wind shifted a little bit and before I turned to block off the wind. The wind is not, the temperatures are nice. I mean, they're probably in the low 70s to the mid 80s. But the wind actually does get a little bit cool, blowing on you at the speeds that it is going. My anemometer, which I don't trust a whole lot right now, says it's blowing 11 to 12 knots, but I have a feeling it's blowing a lot stronger than that. I know the prediction was for upwards of 20 knots. So anyway, like I said, I am some 20 miles away from entering the Chesapeake Bay and crossing the North Carolina-Virginia border. Um, this part of the trip has been amazingly quick. I did not remember being able to transition from um, Oregon Inlet to Virginia in just 7 hours or so. I guess it's going to be longer than that when it's over with. So 20 miles at the rate I'm going is going to take 3 hours. So nevertheless, it's still relatively quick as far as sailboats go. The old adage is that sailboats have two speeds, slow and stop. This boat doesn't hold to that adage. This boat absolutely flies. And like I said, all I'm running and all I've run for this entire trip has been the Genoa. The main has not even gone up, and I'm making a clean 7 knots right now. So I love the boat. So anyway, I'm off to sleep for a little bit until I get closer to the Chesapeake Bay, the entrance to the channel, and then I'll get back up and take care of business. Between 1 and 1:30 Wednesday morning, there was a horrible sound from under the cockpit, and I lost steering. I went down and checked, and the upper support for the rudder post had just fallen apart. It was only half-inch plywood that was not even epoxied. It was held on with some sort of adhesive, like a caulking. The reason for it falling apart was that I had been in very strong, heavy seas, following seas, since I had left Oregon Inlet. And apparently it was too much for the rudder being pushed back and forth and caused the destruction that happened. Couldn't do anything, didn't want to do anything right then. I was very tired, so I dropped anchor in 80 feet of water and went to bed. So I got up the next morning and about 7 and effected repairs upon the upper rudder post structure the best I could with the materials I had on hand. So I ate breakfast and took a shower, and about 10 o'clock started sailing again. About an hour and a half later, the upper structure support for the rudder post fell apart again. This was about 11:30, somewhere in that area. So I called the Coast Guard and asked them if they would call the co-owner, Jeff, and ask him to call the insurance company so they could call somebody to come tow me in. At the time, I was about 23 miles off of Virginia Beach. I dropped anchor, and this time I was only in about 60 feet of water. The Coast Guard would call about every 30 minutes to check on my status. And about 2 o'clock, I finally told them, I said, oh, just as a point of interest, I am taking on water at the rate of about half a gallon every 3 minutes. Nothing the bilge pump can't handle. Well, they went absolutely ballistic. You would have thought I had told them I was sinking right then and there, and it was the end of my life. They sent 3 boats out. One from Virginia Beach Fire and Rescue, a 37-foot or so rigid inflatable from the Coast Guard, and then a 70-foot cutter from the Coast Guard. The fire and rescue got there first and asked me what was going on, and the smaller Coast Guard boat showed up next, and they explained what was going on. And it was then I found out that the towing company, the insurance company had called, had decided it was too rough for them to come out, so they weren't going to bother with it. So the smaller of the two Coast Guard boats took me under tow, and it was a slow tow, and nothing really bad going on. But after a little while, the cutter came out, and the small boat had to leave because they were about out of service hours. The cutter then took me under tow, and they were towing me much faster than the smaller Coast Guard boat had. And this was causing the rudder to swing wildly back and forth and sort of reaming out the hole that it came through the bottom of the boat. The towing, when the cutter took off, I was right behind them, but after a few minutes, I was on their extreme port side. It was kind of like a skier. You could accelerate and come up beside the boat on the end of the rope. I explained to them that I could fix the problem, and they said, "That would be great. Just stay on the radio while you do." And I explained that I wouldn't be able to stay on the radio because I had to stand on the back step of the boat, raise a hatch up, take a 10-man life raft out of its storage compartment, then open another compartment. From there, I could see the top of the rudder post, and I could have attached the manual steering to it, manual steering tiller, and held it sort of in place. Well, the Master Chief of the Coast Guard boat decided that was too much work to do, and things were stable as they were, and so he told me no. So I laid down and was taking a nap when I heard water running, and it woke me up, and I'm looking around to see where the water's running, and it's the bilge pump, and it's running continually. So I went and checked the bilge, and sure enough, it was starting to fill up, and the bilge pump could not handle the amount of water coming through the rudder post hole. So I called the cutter and told them what was going on. So they had me drop the tow line, and they prepared a smaller boat to bring a pump over. Well, from the time that I called them to the time that the small boat arrived with the pump, about 45 minutes had gone by. So the Coast Guard personnel, it was one of them, hooked up the pump, and the first thing you noticed was that there was no gasket on the intake hose. So the small boat had to go back over to the big boat and get another hose and bring it back. So the gentleman got the first pump hooked up and worked for about an hour to get it to start, and it would not start. So the little boat went back to the big boat, and it got a second pump. And he bought that one. They bought that one over, and he hooked it up and was able to get it to start. At this point, the water was about 8 inches over the floorboard in the boat, and we drained it down below the level of the floorboards. At that point, we both went forward and reattached the tow line onto the cutter, or from the cutter to the sailboat, and that took a little while. And by the time we got back to the cockpit, there was a foot of water in the boat. At this point, the gentleman from the Coast Guard tried to start the second pump, and it would only run for a short period of time before it cut off. And it wasn't enough time to actually drain the water out of the boat. At this point, I didn't have a whole lot of faith in good things happening. So I went ahead and went down upstairs and packed all my electronic stuff into its carrying bag, and I packed all my clothes into my other bag and brought everything up into the cockpit. The Coast Guard gentleman continued to work on the pump without any luck. Eventually, the cutter sent another gentleman over in the small boat to help him try to figure out what was wrong. While waiting on the second gentleman to come over, I called the Master Chief on board the cutter and told him that while I appreciated the effort, there wasn't much hope for the boat at this point. It was obviously going to sink. He agreed, but wanted to give the second Coast Guardman a chance to help him get the pump running. Well, the second Coast Guardman hadn't been on board for 5 minutes before the captain gave the order to abandon ship. So we threw my bags into the small boat, and I climbed into the small boat. And the two crewmen on board Dragonfire, they climbed onto the small boat, and we went over to the cutter and parked in their garage. By the time that we got out of the smaller boat, I was absolutely soaked from waves hitting us. So they gave me a blanket and a towel, and I went into the bathroom and dried off and changed clothes. And then the Master Chief had invited me up to the uh, control deck, and I went up and witnessed the last few minutes of Dragonfire's existence on the surface as it nosedived into the ocean. The Master Chief took the location of Dragonfire sinking, and we left the area headed for Norfolk. And we got there late in the evening, and the Master Chief drove me to a motel where I could spend the night. The next day, my next door neighbor came from Holly Ridge all the way up to Norfolk and picked me up and brought me back home again. Needless to say, my mood was not one of joy and happiness. We filed a report with the insurance company, and within a few weeks, they paid out what we had the boat insured for. But with it was a bill of sale that gave them all the rights to the boat. Eventually, I talked to the insurance company and bought the rights to the boat back so that I could salvage it and raise it and hopefully restore it. None of that has happened yet. I did buy a couple of weeks ago a 23.5 foot Bayliner cuddy cabin that I'm going to use to determine where the boat is. I've made one trip out into the ocean with the boat. It handles really well. I installed a high-end side scan sonar on the boat to help locate Dragonfire on the bottom. So I went out to where the Coast Guard had told me was its last position and did an expanding circle search from that position. Ended up going out 1,500 feet from that center position and never found Dragonfire. That was a quarter of a square mile that I covered in doing that. I wasn't prepared to stay very long, so I was only out for a few hours and I came on in. That was on Saturday, and then Sunday I came home with the boat, which, by the way, the name of the boat will be Dragon Seeker, since it's looking for Dragonfire. Once the weather calms down a little bit, I will be heading back up to Virginia Beach and head offshore and spend several days offshore in the boat while looking for Dragonfire. So that's the end of the story for now. As the search progresses, I'll let you know what goes on. And hopefully we will find the boat and raise it. So this is David Fansler saying thanks for watching. Subscribe if you'd like. Hit the like button. And I hope that you have a good day. Smooth sailing.